Welcome to Simple Things, where small stories spark big changes and growth begins with honesty. Every morning when the alarm went off, Ella didn't really wake up. Her eyes opened, yes, but her mind stayed somewhere distant, wrapped in a fog not made of weather, but of weariness. A quiet, almost gentle heaviness that clung to her spirit like an old wool blanket. Not depression exactly. Not a medical diagnosis or an emergency worth tweeting about, just a kind of slow erosion, a daily vanishing. Once Ella had been a freelance graphic designer, clever, creative, idealistic. But after the pandemic swallowed her client list and the walls of her apartment became both office and prison, something inside her started crumbling. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to notice. It was more like the slow fading of a photograph left too long in the sun. She didn't tell her friends she was struggling, mostly because she wasn't sure she was. How do you describe a nothingness? A quiet ache. A chronic sense that maybe life wasn't supposed to feel like this, but you're too tired to ask for the manual. Until one morning, mindlessly scrolling through Instagram, pausing only at the flashes of someone else's curated happiness, Ella saw a video. It was a woman probably in her 50s walking slowly through a wheat field, barefoot, eyes soft, breathing as if time didn't exist. Her hands hung loosely by her sides, palms slightly turned up like they were catching wind. The title read, Walking Yoga, the Art of Moving Presence. Ella scoffed out loud, yoga, while walking. What next meditation? While folding laundry. But she watched it, then watched it again. The woman wasn't performing. She wasn't showing off stretches or alignment cues. She wasn't trying to reach anything. She was simply there. One breath, one step, and then another. There was no mat, no leggings, no instructor, just gravity, breath, and awareness. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, Ella felt something flicker in her chest. Not hope, not clarity, just stillness, like someone had placed a gentle hand on her back and whispered, "You're still here, you're still alive." It wasn't an epiphany, no cinematic swell of music, just a small, almost pathetic curiosity. If I just started walking, really walking, could I find myself again? She didn't know what walking yoga meant. She didn't know how to do it. She didn't even know if she believed in it. But she knew this. She was tired of being still. So she started. No rules, no coach, no idea what she was doing. Just a pair of sneakers, a hint of intention, and a heart bruised by stillness, but not yet broken. Her first walks didn't lead anywhere. They were messy, boring, full of resistance. Her brain screamed lists and anxieties, but her feet kept moving. And with each step, something loosened. Memories bubbled up. Feelings she'd buried long ago. The smell of her mother's garden, the silence after her father's funeral, her childhood bedroom with the posters still on the wall and the one question no one ever answered. Why didn't I forgive myself for surviving? She passed a man walking his dog, a child learning to ride a bike, a couple arguing under a tree. Life went on, but something in her shifted. That morning, for the first time in forever, Ella didn't feel the urge to rush back inside. She didn't know what she was chasing. Maybe nothing. But the simple act of placing one foot in front of the other began to feel like rebellion, like an act of self-trust. She was moving, not away from something, but towards something quiet, something true. Maybe walking yoga wasn't a discipline or a destination. Maybe it was just this permission to be here, with your breath, with your feet, with the part of you that refuses to go numb. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start. Walking became Ella's quiet secret. It wasn't glamorous or shareable. She didn't post about it. She didn't buy new gear. She didn't even tell her therapist because somehow it felt too small to matter and too sacred to explain. But it mattered. Each morning before the city could fully wake, she slipped out the door like a whisper and started moving. No music, no step counter, just the rhythm of her breath and the growing awareness that something inside her was cracking, not breaking down, breaking open. At first she thought it was just a new way to cope, a distraction, a different form of numbing. But as days bled into weeks, she noticed the difference. Walking didn't numb her, it exposed her. She started hearing her own thoughts again, not the loud, reactive, anxious thoughts, but the quiet ones, the ones that only spoke up when you gave them space. Why do I still blame myself for things that weren't my fault? Who am I when I'm not performing for anyone? When did I stop believing I was allowed to feel joy? With each question came a wave, and some of those waves hit hard. One morning she stopped mid-step in the middle of the park and began to cry. Not the kind of crying that slips down your cheek silently. No, this was a flood. Ugly, public, whole-body grief. She didn't even know what she was crying about until the memory surfaced. Her mother's voice years ago. "You have to keep it together, Ella. You're the strong one. You're all we have." That sentence had shaped her entire adulthood. She became the one who didn't cry, who didn't rest, who didn't fall apart, even when everything around her did. And in that moment, under the bare branches of an early spring tree, she realized how long she'd been walking with a weight that was never hers to carry. Walking yoga, whatever that even was, wasn't about the posture. It wasn't about the mechanics of the step. It was about returning to breath, to body, to boundaries, to truth. She stopped walking that day and sat on a bench. The breeze stirred her hair like fingers combing through years of silence. And for once she didn't push the tears away. She let them come. She let herself be undone. Later at home, she opened her laptop and searched for the term walking yoga. Not out of curiosity, but out of a quiet hunger to name what she'd been experiencing. The definitions varied. Some called it a meditative practice. Others treated it as a spiritual ritual. Some people used it as a physical warm-up. Some practiced it in silence. Others recited mantras with each step. But the one thing all sources agreed on was this: walking yoga was not about achieving. It was about arriving. Ella read that line 3 times. Walking yoga is not about achieving. It's about arriving. And suddenly everything inside her stilled. Because for most of her life, Ella had been running, chasing success, healing approval, identity. Even her grief was efficient, controlled, measured, edited. But now each walk was an act of surrender. A declaration that she didn't need to fix herself before she was allowed to feel whole. That she could be messy and radiant at the same time. That she could be breaking and still be enough. In the days that followed, she began to notice things she'd overlooked for years, the way the morning light filtered through trees like stained glass, the way her feet found new rhythms when she stopped forcing a pace, the way her breath softened when she stopped trying to control it. Walking had become a mirror. And what she saw finally wasn't a woman too broken to be loved. It was a woman brave enough to meet herself step by step, breath by breath. But growth, like healing, doesn't come in a straight line. And just when she thought she was finding peace, life sent her a reminder: there is always another layer. Always another shadow waiting to be acknowledged. And the next one would take her to the edge. There's a strange thing that happens when you walk in silence long enough. The world gets louder. Not in a chaotic way, but in a revealing one. You begin to notice things, the way the sidewalk gently rises, where tree roots push beneath it, the faint buzz of electricity overhead, the damp perfume of grass before it rains. And then, if you're really still, you begin to hear yourself. Not the voice you use with coworkers, not the one you use in therapy, but the voice that's been narrating your life for years. And for Ella, that voice was brutal. You're wasting time. You never finish anything. You're a fraud. You'll never catch up. She hadn't realized how often she spoke to herself like that, how casually, how consistently, how easily those words slipped into the rhythm of her steps like stones in her shoes. One morning, her walk took her through a path she hadn't followed before, an overgrown trail behind an old community garden. As she walked deeper, it began to feel less like a detour and more like a memory. The kind of place she might have played as a child back when days were long and consequences were few. It hit her there in the quiet. She had never actually liked herself. She'd admired her discipline, respected her productivity, even found pride in her pain. But she hadn't offered herself tenderness. Not really. Not without condition. And now in this moment of slowness and simplicity, she saw it all. Clear as a mirror held to her face. She had spent years trying to outrun shame. Shame for not being more successful. Shame for needing rest. Shame for not saving her mother from illness. Shame for not saving herself from burnout. And it had worked for a while. The noise of ambition had drowned out the ache. But now that the noise had quieted, there it was, that ache. Raw, undeniable. She sat beneath a tree and whispered something aloud just to test if it could exist in the air without shattering her. I'm allowed to forgive myself. The words trembled. Because forgiving herself meant acknowledging the wounds. It meant saying, I didn't cause all of this pain and I don't have to carry it alone. It meant dropping the performance. It meant not being impressive. It meant being honest. And honesty, she was learning, wasn't always graceful. It was messy and shaky and sometimes full of snot and silence, but it was hers. And it was holy. She looked at her reflection in the screen of her phone, smudged, sunlit, unfiltered, not perfect, not polished, but present. And for the first time in a very, very long time, she didn't flinch. She didn't try to fix her face or angle the camera. She just looked. And behind the tired eyes, behind the anxious thoughts, behind the years of carrying everyone else's expectations, she saw a woman still standing. Still walking, still here. But forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once. It's a path. And on that path, Ella would face her hardest question yet. Can I forgive the people who didn't love me the way I needed? Because walking toward yourself is one kind of courage. Walking toward the past, that's another kind entirely. Ella had forgiven herself. At least she was trying to, day by day, step by step. But now came a different ache, the kind that lived in her chest like a locked drawer she didn't want to open. The ache named other people. Her father, her ex, the friend who disappeared when she needed her most, the colleague who took credit and smiled like it was nothing, her mother loving, yes, but relentless in her expectations. Ella had tried not to hold grudges. She believed in being kind, in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But somewhere along the way, being kind had turned into being silent. Being understanding had turned into being invisible. She didn't rage. She disappeared. And now, with her body moving, her breath steady, her feet learning the language of forgiveness, something inside her shifted. A question began to echo in her walks. What if letting go doesn't mean excusing what they did? What if it just means I stop bleeding from the wound? The shift wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen in a single cathartic scream or some teary confrontation. It happened quietly, as most true things do. One morning, walking through the older part of town, Ella passed a familiar storefront, an old bookstore that had once belonged to her father. It had been sold years ago after the estate battle, but the sign still bore his name in faded gold lettering. She hadn't spoken his name out loud in years. He wasn't a bad man, just unreachable, always working, always providing. She grew up in the shadows of his ambition, praised when she performed, ignored when she cried. He died 3 years ago. She hadn't gone to the funeral. And suddenly standing there, years later, in a body that had walked miles to find itself, she whispered, "You hurt me. But I'm tired of carrying that hurt." The words didn't feel righteous. They felt raw. Because forgiveness, she was learning, didn't have to come with reconciliation. It didn't mean trust. It didn't even mean closure. Sometimes forgiveness was just this stopping the story where the pain wants to keep repeating itself. She placed her hand against the dusty glass. Not in drama, in something gentler, almost reverent, and then she kept walking, not because it was over, but because it was finally moving. Later that week, Ella wrote a letter. Not to send, just to write. It was to her mother. She wrote, "I know you did your best, but I needed something gentler. I needed someone to hold space for my softness instead of polishing it into strength. You taught me survival, and I love you for that. But I'm finally learning how to live, not just survive. And I'm doing it by unlearning the silence." She folded the letter and tucked it in her notebook. No one would ever read it. But it wasn't about them anymore. It was about her. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing peace when anger had become a habit. It meant walking away from what had already walked away from her. And still there was more. Because in every story of healing, there's a moment where the pain no longer defines you. But the world doesn't know that yet. And that's when the true test begins. Can you show up differently in a world that still expects the old version of you? Can you stay soft where you once built walls? Can you be present without performing? Can you belong to yourself? Ella was about to find out. The first time someone noticed something had changed in Ella, it wasn't during a big moment. It wasn't during a speech or a milestone or a dramatic reinvention. It was during a walk to the farmer's market when her neighbor, the one who always rushed past with earbuds in, paused beside her and said, "You look lighter, like you're breathing differently." Ella smiled. Not because she had lost weight or found religion or completed a challenge, but because the woman was right. She was breathing differently. For the first time in her adult life, she was inhabiting her body without urgency, without armor, without apology. She no longer walked to get somewhere. She walked to arrive again and again into herself. Not every day was graceful. Some mornings the old fog still crept in like mist beneath a locked door. But now she met it differently. She no longer believed the fog was her fault or her identity. It was weather, and weather passes. Walking yoga, she'd come to realize, was never about fitness. It wasn't about flexibility or control. It was about companionship with your own breath, your own discomfort, your own story. She didn't need incense or Sanskrit chants or perfect posture. She just needed one thing: presence. Presence in motion. Presence when the inner critic got loud. Presence when the world got fast. Presence when the past whispered lies. Presence when joy bloomed in unexpected places like dandelions between cracked sidewalks. And with that presence came power. The kind of power no one can give you and no one can take away. The power to walk yourself home, to walk past the story you were handed, to walk toward a life you're willing to create. Now, when Ella sees people jogging with grimaces, barking orders at their own bodies to move faster, burn more, do better, she smiles gently, not with judgment, with recognition. She was once like that, always pushing, always proving. Now she walks slowly, sometimes barefoot, sometimes with music, sometimes in silence, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, but always walking. And somewhere between each step and each breath, she's writing a new story, a quieter one, a softer one in which the destination doesn't matter as much as who she becomes along the way. There is no final pose, no enlightenment checkpoint, just this moment, this breath, this ground beneath her. And you. Maybe you're listening to this because you're tired too. Maybe you're looking for something that doesn't hurt to hold, something that doesn't demand performance, something that feels like coming home. If so, try walking. Not to run away, not to get in shape, not to check a box, but to begin again. Begin again with your breath. Begin again with your grief. Begin again with your softness. You don't have to have a plan or a goal or a perfect morning routine. You just have to begin. Because sometimes the most powerful transformation doesn't look like a breakthrough. Sometimes it looks like a quiet walk around the block. And if no one's told you yet, that's enough. You're enough. And you're allowed to become. Sometimes the most powerful transformation doesn't come with fanfare. It arrives quietly, in a slow morning, in a steady breath, in a single step taken with intention. And maybe right now you're standing at the edge of your own becoming. If this story spoke to something inside, you don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with someone who needs to remember they're allowed to begin again. Because sometimes all we really need is to know we're not walking alone.